Welcome back. This is a little bit different of a video this time. Something that I've wanted to do with a video series was to talk about two different topics. So this will be two different videos, a two-part series, so to speak. They won't be back-to-back or anything like that. But something that I wanted to share were two topics, and one of them is, a top 5 things you should know before you buy a mini lathe, and then a top 5 things you're going to purchase or want to purchase after you buy a mini lathe. So this video is going to be the top 5 things that I think you should know before you actually click the Buy It Now button on eBay, or the Add to Cart button on Amazon, or go to Vevor, or go to Harbor Freight, or wherever you're going to go and buy one of these things. So that's what this video is going to be about. Now, before we get to that, I've got my shop coat on. It's the Midwest, it's winter, it's cold. I've got the heater on. Gonna watch some Thursday night football. Just a good night to be in the garage, but I do want to cover this topic. So the intended audience for this are people who they're new to the hobby. They have an interest in learning and working with their hands, and they really want to get into the hobby machining, and they've never worked in a machine shop before. They don't have any equipment. They don't have any knowledge of how all this stuff works. That's where I came from. I just had an interest. I'm like, that looks cool. That looks like fun. I want to work with my hands. So that's where the perspective of this video is coming from. I want you to understand that. And for those experienced out there, hopefully you can kind of look back and laugh and think and relate to when you first got into this hobby. And those that are new, I hope you find value in this before you actually purchase the product, so that you can actually put some more thought than I did into it before you actually make that purchase. So I did make notes for this video because I want to cover everything, and I'm going to forget some things. I tried my best to write everything down that I think that I wanted to know and cover, that I would have liked to know before I bought this thing. With that being said, I don't regret the purchase. I love it. I'm having a great time. I've met a lot of good people who are helpful. It's a really cool community. It's a fun hobby to get into. I encourage you to do it. But you need to know these things before you get into it. Hopefully this helps you out. So, I'm going to go 1 through 5, with 5 being, I think, one of the most important aspects to understand. But all these are important things for you to keep in mind before you purchase a mini lathe. From my perspective, as someone who's never never worked in a machine shop and never done any of this. So, without delaying this any further, number 1. Understand that additional money is going to be required. You're not going to find this thing for $500, $700, $800. $500 if you go with the cheapest, $999, $1,500, whatever you decide to buy, whatever your budget. That's not going to be the end of it. Again, keep this in mind that this is from somebody who didn't work in a machine shop. I don't have machine tools. I don't have anything. I got home tools to work and fix and repair the home. That's it. So, you are going to need extra money after you purchase the initial price of whatever lathe it is you get. I don't care how much it is. You're going to need half again as much, maybe twice as much. So expect to spend a minimum of $500 more on tooling and additional tools and things that you're going to want to add to the hobby. Understand that. Number 2. There will be quality issues. There's going to be quality issues with the lathes. They're going to range from cosmetic issues to functional issues. Don't buy one of these unless you understand that and accept it. There's cosmetic, there's one right here. The front panels are installed and they're re-drilled. It's just terrible, terrible, terrible quality. There's, in the castings, there's pitting, they just don't care. But then again, think about what you paid for it, right? You're not paying 5, 10, 15 grand for one of these things. So you're getting what you get. So understand the quality issues are going to be there, and you're going to have to tinker with it to make it better. Accept it. Now, number 3. Workspace and safety. Before you buy one of these, understand that these things can be dangerous. I'm guilty of not always following the correct procedures and rules, but it can't be understated how important safety is. Safety glasses. This stuff, there's little shards of metal going everywhere. It can get in your eyeballs. You don't need to go blind for doing just a fun little hobby. Hearing protection. Some of this stuff squeals. It's very loud. Put some earplugs in. Think about your workspace. You want something comfortable, at a comfortable height to work with. You want to be able to get to it. You want to be able to get to all sides of it. You want to be able to mount the lathe to your workbench so that it's as stable as it can be. You know, it's going to throw chips everywhere. Make sure that you're okay with wherever you place it for having that mess being thrown around. You're going to get some oil thrown here and there. Keep in mind where you want this thing mounted. So, workspace and safety. That's something you should know what you're going to do with this lathe if you buy one of these and it shows up on your doorstep. Where are you going to put the thing? It's heavy. Have somebody help you pick it up. Safety. So, just one thing I want to point out, a lot of people have mentioned this, and I'm guilty of it, but again, from the get-go, make sure that you have a home for this chuck key. Doesn't matter what kind you have, but do not leave it in your chuck. You turn this thing on and that thing goes flinging across the room. At best, it's going to break a window in your car or put a hole in the wall. At worst, it's going to knock you in the head. It's going to knock you out. This thing is a projectile. Don't get in the habit of leaving this thing in your chuck. Find a home for it. Put it away every time you're done using it. Don't leave it in your drill or your lathe chuck. Keep that in mind. Develop good habits from the get-go. Know that before you get into this hobby. Number 4. Something that I didn't realize was as important as it is. Again, I didn't work in a machine shop. I don't understand all this. I didn't realize all this, but terminology. Understand the proper terminology and learn how to speak the language of a proper machinist. There's measurement terminology. You have parts of the lathe that you want to have your terminology correct. When you start working with people in the industry or people that want to help you, and you're trying to communicate the problems you're having, you're going to want to know what all these components are to describe what your problems are so they can offer the proper help and solutions. People are so helpful, but some of them get annoyed when you start calling things improper terms. It's kind of a pride thing, I believe, in the industry, or people that have put in the effort to learn all the proper terms and ways to do things. You come in as a brand new person and you're calling things, you're making those same dumb newbie mistakes and you're calling things terms that they're not. Make the effort to do some research and figure out what the terminology and the components and everything are. I'll give you some examples. Something that I found, examples of things that I found important as I was working through this. I've heard the term Morse taper. I knew what Morse tapers were, but I didn't really know just to what extent how important that was. So these lathes all have Morse tapers. Depending on what lathe you have, you're going to have different Morse tapers. My particular tailstock has a Morse taper too. Why is that important? When you go to buy accessories for this tailstock, you've got to make sure you get a Morse taper 2 designed product in order for it to fit in this tailstock. Now, let's go to the other end, the headstock. If I want to buy a collet chuck or a forge jaw or something that is a Morse taper, I have to get a Morse taper 5. So do the research on the product you're going to buy and learn what tapers you might have. Morse taper 2, Morse taper 5. Depends on what I want to buy and add on to this thing. I need to know those things. Fasteners. People get kind of frustrated with this too. It depends on if you're from the UK or from the United States. But these little guys here, the things up here, the things I've been struggling with, they're called gibs in the United States. With a G, gib. It's okay to call them jibs if you're in the UK. So there's no right or wrong way, but depending on where you're at, there is people that get annoyed by how you pronounce these things. These screws here in the US, they're referred to as cap head screws. They got a little cap on the top of the screws. So it's kind of easy to remember, cap head screws. The screws that go inside these recessed holes, these are set screws or grub screws if you're in the UK. Those are just some different things that I've learned throughout the last 6 months of working with this hobby. Parts of the lathe. You want to learn the parts of the lathe. All this you can do without buying one of these things. Tailstock, headstock, lathe chuck, lathe bed, carriage. I call this the whole thing the carriage. Here's the apron on the carriage. You have your cross slide, and then you have your top slide. You have a quick change tool post, or a tool post that came with it. It's not quick change, but there's a tool post. That's what's bounded up here. You have your variable speed controls here, your e-stop or emergency stop up top, forward and reverse controls. Your gearing is back behind this side here, depending on what lathe you get. Most of them let you change gears out for threading. Then there's a thread chart and everything on the front of your lathe. You have your feed screw, your lead screw, I think is what it's called a lot of times. You have a locking carriage lock mechanism up here on this side. Just learn and understand, pay attention to a lot of the videos that are out there. They describe all this stuff, chip pan, just different things like that. The other thing, spindle bore. Spindle bore is how large a material you can put through your lathe chuck through the headstock. So let's say you have a 3/4 inch spindle bore. The biggest material that you can have longer than, let's say, your lathe chuck, which is what, 4 or 6 inches or so, would be a 1/4 inch, or anything bigger than a 1/4 inch. 3/4 inches, that's as big as you can do, what, 4 or 5, 6 inches. If you have a larger spindle bore, you can run that, let's say you have a 2-foot piece of material, you can run it all the way through the headstock. So keep that in mind depending on what you want to do with this hobby, and what's important to you, and maybe that doesn't matter. So as you buy these things, pay attention to those things. Finally, when it comes to terminology, measurement. This is something I struggle with. Again, I didn't grow up in a machine shop. I didn't know measuring and all that terminology. I just seen it. I thought, oh, that's easy. It's not. It takes practice. You're going to struggle. Excuse me. Learn that everything is, on the SAE side, Standard American, you're kind of looking at everything's measured in thousandths of an inch. So, you do have fifths or tenths, sorry. So that's if you want to get really, really, really accurate with your measurements. But you want to start speaking in terms of the thousandths, 20 thou, 10 thou, 50 thou, 100 thou. That's the kind of measurements that you're going to be removing from material. You're going to be measuring on material. 1 inch, that's 1,000 thousandths. So learn how to read that, learn how to speak that language, and then when you start working with other people who want to help you, you're going to be able to speak the language with them and relay information and understand what needs to be done in the particular project you're working on, as long as you can speak the same language. Yeah, so these lathes all come in metric. Keep that in mind, but I don't really use the dials that are in metric. I use my caliper and things like that to measure. But again, both measurements are something to be aware of, because you're going to deal with fasteners that are either in metric or standard American. So learn them both. Fine. Number 5, and finally, the number 5 thing that I think you should know before you purchase a lathe is research the types of tooling and accessories for the projects that you might want to tackle. Again, when I purchased this, I didn't know what kind of tools I might need. I don't know any of that stuff. So once I got this thing, I quickly realized, crap, I'm going to need more stuff. And this goes back to number 1, you're going to spend more money. So keep that in mind. But the types of tools and things that you should know about before you buy one of these are, you get brazed carbide. That's the things that came with this lathe. That's these wonderful blue, sometimes they're different colors, but this is generally what you're going to get when you purchase a mini lathe, is the brazed carbide tooling. It's fine, but you got to remember there's things you need to do to these before you use them. It's not ready to go out of the box. High-speed steel. High-speed steel is another type of tooling. You can purchase this, you can grind it, it's custom, it's more affordable than the carbide inserts, which we'll talk about in a second. So I highly encourage anyone getting into this to just understand you're going to buy some of this and you're going to play around with this too. You can make all kinds of shapes. Definitely something that makes part of this hobby fun. Carbide insert tools. That's the indexable type of tooling that you can get. Let's see if I can bring this up here. So you can take a screw off, you can rotate these. Oftentimes you'll have 2 or 3, sometimes 4 cuttable corners that you can rotate through in a particular insert. These do become costly over time because as they get dull, you just rotate them and eventually you throw them away and you got to buy more. The benefit is they're easy. They're pre-ground. They got chip cutters built into them. There's a benefit to having them. And if you don't go through a lot of cutters, maybe that's the way to go. I kind of like using both. I like using the carbide inserts and the high-speed tool. For me, the high-speed tool, all of this is fun and entertaining and part of my hobby. I want to learn all of it. So I'm wanting to use all the tooling, all the different kinds that I can. Let's see, parting tools. Here's another one. So you're gonna need a parting tool at some point when you're working with material, and that's a thin blade that will cut your material that you're working with off. And just know that you're gonna probably want that type of a blade too. A lot of that stuff doesn't come with the lathe when you purchase it. Knurling tool, thread cutting, boring bars. Again, a lot of that, you get a small, kind of a cheap variation of that stuff with the lathe. Here's a boring bar example that came with it. But, some of that stuff you're going to want to upgrade right away. So that's kind of your tool cutters. Center drill bits. If you're going to use the tail stock, you're going to want to get like a drill chuck. Or a live center, and you're going to want to be able to drill a center drill. You're going to need some center drill bits if you don't have that stuff. So just understand that those are all the kinds of tools that you're going to want to, you need to know. You don't get that stuff with most lathes. You're going to have to know that stuff exists out there, and that there's a good chance that you're going to want to be aware that I'm going to probably want to get all this stuff. Tool posts, something that I didn't know. Again, I bought this thing green. I didn't know anything about this. It comes with a tool post. I liked the tool post it came with, but something that you don't know is it requires shims to center your cutting blade. So if we go back to our cutting blade, you know, when you're cutting and facing off material, this needs to be centered up with your material in order to get a proper face cut or working through your material. The tool post that it came with requires you to take some thin shim material and shim up your tool cutter height until you get it to be centered on your material. I don't have shim material. I mean, I got some scrap flat pieces of aluminum and cardboard and this and that, and you can jam it in there. But I thought, well, that's a pain. I don't want to do that every time I want to change a tool cutter out. So the first thing that I wanted to upgrade was my tool post, and I wanted to get a quick change tool post. That leads me to the next thing. Don't just search Amazon for a tool post, a quick change tool post, and buy the first one that shows up. You're gonna find one that's less than 30 bucks. It's gonna be a tiny little aluminum one that is not substantial. It's not gonna be great. It'll work for a while, but you'll quickly wanna upgrade it. Slow down, use the one that came with it if you can, shove some aluminum or shim stock or something in there until you can thoroughly think about, do some research, find some other videos, watch some of my videos on my new tool post, and find out what, for your lathe, what tool, quick change tool post you're gonna wanna get. I recommend for this size lathe, the wedge type quick change tool post that's made out of steel. This particular size is AXA. That's something you're gonna wanna know before you purchase this stuff. There's different sizes of these. You have 0XA, which is the smallest one, which is probably half the size of this one. It seems very puny on the lathe. If you watch some of my previous videos, you'll see examples of that. This is an AXA. Then there's a BXA, a CXA, and so on. They get bigger and bigger for professionals and large machines and you know, nothing like that. Generally, you're going to either go with the 0XA or the AXA for these small machines. The AXA is only going to work on a bigger of the smaller machines, if that makes sense. You put one of these on the really small ones, the 6-inch or the 7-inch, it's probably overkill. Personally, I like it. But when you buy this thing, your tool holders, all of these things I was showing you, these are sized for that particular tool holder too. So if I went with the 0XA, these things are quite a bit smaller. Same with the BXA or the CXA. These are going to be much bigger. Keep that in mind. Your tool holders are sized for the size of tool post that you have. So keep all that in mind. You're probably going to want to switch to a quick change tool post. The biggest benefit is centering. If you look here on these, you have this adjustable screw, and that can just quickly adjust your height, and it's repeatable every single time. Makes it good for beginners. So I recommend it. Some people don't need it. I like it. And finally, with parts, and this is still part of the research the types of accessories you're going to want. This is number 5, my biggest category for things you're going to want to know. Top 5 things you're going to want to know before you purchase one of these lathes is metrology. I sound like I know what I'm talking about when I say that word, but you're going to need, if you don't have this stuff, you're going to need calipers. You're going to need measurement tools. You're going to need a micrometer, perhaps. You're going to need a 6-inch rule, machinist rule. You're going to need maybe a machinist square. You're going to need different measurement tools, digital versus analog. Decide what you want to get. You can start out cheap. I don't recommend you go too cheap because you're going to quickly realize that's too cheap. I'm going to buy another one. So spend, apologize, spend a little bit of extra money and get something. You don't need to go and stare at quality tools just to get into this, but spend a little extra money and get some decent products in order, especially when you're around calipers. You're going to use calipers all the time. Just understand that you're going to need measurement tools, dial indicators. You're going to need to know that you're going to want dial indicators, because you're going to want to check the run out of your material. Is it spinning? Is it centered inside your drill chuck or your lathe chuck? When you spin it, you want to get it as concentric and centered as possible, and these dial indicators are going to help you do that. So you're going to want to get something like that. Something that you should be aware of, and I'm going to cover this more on the next video, but you got to pay attention. All these, you don't just buy a dial indicator. If you get one, things like the stem, that has a certain size. This one's 3/8. A lot of the smaller ones are 8mm. I didn't know that till I bought it. So if you buy a mag base, which you're going to want to get to mount it to your lathe in order to mount it and do whatever it is you're doing, you can't mount this thing in the wrong sized mag base. So all these things you're going to want to know before you go and buy one of these. You're going to want to buy all that stuff. You're going to want to get all that. You're going to want to know a lot of the lingo and the terminology when you first start getting set up with this, because you're going to have a lot of questions. And I mean, that kind of brings me to an end of this particular video. Again, this is a different video. I don't usually get on camera, but I wanted to for this one. It's just me kind of talking. I'll try to put some bullet points and stuff up here on the video, but I do have one bonus recommendation you should know before you get into this. You need to be good at fixing things. You need to be good at troubleshooting, and you need to be open-minded to other people who want to share ideas and thoughts and suggestions and feedback for help. I've been very open-minded, and I've gotten such incredible help from others out there. Go into it with that same attitude, and you're going to have a great time. There's a bunch of channels out there. Watch my channel, watch the other channels. There's a lot of good content, things that you might not realize. It'll cover it before you go and jump in and spend the money on it. It may sway you one way or the other if you want to get into it. But overall, knowing these things, I think would have helped me prior to purchasing the lathe. Wouldn't have changed it. I still would have bought it, and I'm glad I did. But it certainly would have helped if I had known these items prior to purchasing this lathe. I'm going to call that a video here. It's holiday time. Merry Christmas. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you subscribing. If you're not subscribed, please do. I'm trying to expand my channel. Just something I want to do, personal goal. And if you have any comments or suggestions or other advice for people watching this, put it down in the comments. They're going to find it useful. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.